Okay. Well, everyone, it looks like our numbers are stabilizing. Again, my name is Peter Tabbins. I'm the MPP for Toronto-Danforth. I'm the Ontario NDP Shadow Minister for the Environment. I spend a lot of time working on climate issues, and we're holding this webinar tonight to talk about one of the obstacles to climate action, and that's the belief on the part of many that climate action will reduce jobs in our society and will not actually give us the job creation we need. With this panel of folks we have this evening, we hope to address that fairly thoroughly. With those opening remarks, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Samantha Green, Dr. Samantha Green, who will be providing us with the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Peter. I would like to start our meeting in a good way by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples whose traditional territory we have gathered on today. I know many of us are in different places across the province of Ontario, across the country, but for me and for Peter, we are both located in Toronto, Toronto, and for thousands of years, this land has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. This territory is also the subject of the dish with one spoon wampum, a covenant originally made between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people. And everyone who shares this territory eats out of the same dish with only one spoon. So we have a collective responsibility to ensure the dish is never empty. This includes caretaking the land and committing to coexist with each other in the spirit of friendship and mutual prosperity. Importantly, there are no knives at the table, representing that we must keep the peace. With these reflections in mind, I'd ask that we bring our hearts and minds together in our shared purpose and commit ourselves to the ongoing process of reconciliation and learning about our shared histories.
Samantha, thank you very much. I'm going to briefly review the agenda this evening. Uh, we are going to be trying to explore that issue of job creation through climate action and what promise it holds for us in this society. I want to say to all of you who are attending that if you want to pose questions, please use the Q&A function. The chat function we are using just for managing this session amongst the panelists and our background folks. So again, if you have comments that you want to pass on or questions, use the Q&A function. Uh, Secondly, we're going to have our panelists speak. We have four really strong panelists. We think you'll quite enjoy what they have to present. When they finish speaking, we'll go to questions and commentary. We want your questions. We want to explore the issues that you bring up. And my guess is you're going to have a lot that you want to have our panelists expand on. And then we'll close off with some comments by Dr. Green and myself, and some further information about where we go from here. So I look forward to having you uh, make your commentary, ask your questions, and we'll go from there. So with that, Samantha?
Yes, I am going to say a few words to introduce MPP Peter Tabbins. We've already heard from him, but I think we should hear a little bit more about him and from him. Peter was re-elected as the Member of Provincial Parliament for Toronto-Danforth on February 27th, 2025. Peter continues to bring fresh new ideas to Queen's Park on creating jobs while fighting climate change, keeping people safe from toxins, housing affordability, public transit funding, and integrating new Canadians into our economy. Um, I know he's also working on a lot of great new legislation on climate resilience, which I am also looking forward to. Peter was first elected as the MPP for Toronto Danforth in 2006, 20 years ago, and has held a variety of portfolios, most recently as the official opposition's Shadow Minister for Environment, Conservation and Parks, and also Shadow Minister for Emergency Preparedness and Response.
Samantha, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. And to all of you who've joined us this evening, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us as we go through this issue. All of you understand, I'm sure, that climate action has never been more urgent. And at the same time, we're constantly encountering political obstacles. And as I mentioned earlier, one of those obstacles is this belief that if you get heavily into climate action, that you won't be able to create jobs, that in fact, climate action will reduce the opportunity people have to make a living. And in fact, in my opinion, not only does climate action provide huge opportunities for job creation, But failure to act on climate will endanger our jobs in the future. And there are a few comments I want to make before we go further. The first is that a number of years ago, I worked on the NDP's climate plan for Ontario. And one of the programs we proposed was a large scale energy retrofit program, making it possible to retrofit every home in Ontario to dramatically cut its energy use. And that would cut people's energy bills substantially and make us more resilient in the face of extreme weather. But it would also create an awful lot of jobs. We calculated, and I will say this very roughly, that we would need a workforce equivalent to the one that currently is doing home retrofits, sorry, home renovations, kitchens, bathrooms, decks across Ontario. About 100,000 people employed full time. We would need to replicate that to do the energy conservation retrofits at the scale and pace that are necessary to take on the climate crisis. The job opportunities for people in this one project alone are huge. One of our panelists this evening, John Cartwright, who I get a chance to introduce later, can speak to the opportunities that exist not just in the residential sector, but in the industrial, commercial, and industrial sectors from very direct experience. And one of the huge economic boosts that comes from energy conservation, renewable energy installation, heat pump installation, is that we could dramatically reduce our import of fossil fuels coming in to Ontario from Western Canada, from the United States. We spend about $14 to $20 billion a year. We send $14 to $20 billion a year out of Ontario to buy that oil and gas. 70% of our gas comes from the United States. Trish Long will speak to her work on the ground to move us away from dependence on American gas while we put a lot of people to work. The current generation of renewable power is dominating new electricity generation investment around the world. As the cheapest power globally, it's poised to continue growing far beyond what we've seen to date. Where we've had an opportunity to actually install new capacity at a pace that society needed, as in Alberta before Danielle Smith, it had a very big jobs impact. And Megan Gordon, one of our panelists, will speak to that this evening. We have huge opportunity to put people to work at the community level installing solar and wind in Ontario. Serena Mendizabal will talk about what this looks like on the ground with solar installation. A strategy that moves away from fossil fuels and hooks onto the new wave of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and innovative energy technologies like heat pumps is one that will create a huge wave of new jobs. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Dr. Samantha Green, family physician at the Unity Health Toronto and an assistant professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto. She's also the president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, as some of you would know, CAPE. Her work bridges clinical practice, research, practice, change, and advocacy for planetary health. Dr. Green is a fellow at the University of Toronto's Collaborative Centre for Climate, Health, and Sustainable Care, and she co-directs the Taking Action on Planetary Health certificate program at Temerity Faculty of Medicine. Her research focuses on climate-related health challenges, with peer-reviewed publications addressing topics from heat-related risks for vulnerable populations to climate-conscious inhaler prescribing. This work has influenced national respiratory guidelines and hospital policies across Canada and internationally. Samantha, could you make some opening remarks here?
Yes, thank you. That's an embarrassingly long bio. Um, so as a family doctor, as someone who's working at this intersection of climate change and health, that is my perspective. And those are the remarks that I'm going to provide, which may be surprising for people who are here at a jobs and climate webinar. But, climate change has been called the greatest health threat of this century by the World Health Organization, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and others. And as a family physician in Toronto's downtown east, I am already seeing the health impacts of the climate crisis on my patients. Extreme heat, poor air quality from wildfire smoke, increased incidence of Lyme disease, contracted right here in downtown Toronto. These are just some of the health harms I see in my practice. And it's the patients who are already marginalized who are most affected. People living in poverty, Indigenous people, and those who are racialized. Climate change has also been called the greatest health opportunity of this century. As we transition away from fossil fuels, we will realize immediate health gains from a reduction in air pollution, which actually causes 1 in 7 premature deaths here in Canada, and from other immediate health co-benefits. And this is especially true for fossil fuel workers. Fossil fuel jobs are particularly hazardous, and those who work in mining, oil and gas drilling, refining, and the petrochemical industry are at disproportionate risk of poor health outcomes like lung and heart disease, stroke, cancers, fertility problems, and even dementia. And the communities adjacent to extractive sites are also at increased risk. And yet, workers cannot feed their families on empty promises of a just transition without guaranteed jobs. And we also know, from the academic literature, from health research, that access to decent work, which includes a safe environment, fair wages, job security, is a fundamental social determinant of health. So it's clear that for the health of people, communities, and the planet, we need jobs in the green economy now. Um, and we need to make sure that the green energy transition is not just an empty promise. The medical journal The Lancet has framed the green energy transition as a potential triple gain: better health through safer jobs, reduced climate impacts, and increased employment opportunities. And so that's why I'm so delighted to co-host today's panel with MPP Peter Tabuns, and I'm so excited to hear from our panelists.
Okay. Samantha, thank you very much. I get the opportunity to introduce the first two panelists. I'm going to introduce our first panelist, John Cartwright, who will have an opportunity to comment on the job creation opportunities that he sees. Many of you will know John, former president of the Toronto York Region Labour Council and former chair of the Council of Canadians. But before he took on those roles, he was head of the Carpenters Local here in the GTA. At that time, the City of Toronto was putting together its program to make commercial buildings energy efficient. John knew the job creation potential of that program, spoke out loudly for the labor movement to get people to work while taking on the climate crisis. And with that, John, we'd love to hear from you.
So welcome everyone. I think this is fabulous that we've got over 100 people that are in this on this seminar, wanting to hear a variety of perspectives on climate and good jobs. So, as Peter said, I'm a carpenter by trade. I started my trade at the age of 18, um, and I've worked in buildings large and small all across this city. I'm also a cancer survivor because the toluene and benzene and contact cement I worked for the first 10 years of my life came back in the form of lymphoma at the age of 61. And I always knew there was a connection between health and environment, and that pretty well drove it home. Um, when I was a construction worker, I started to get to know about the opportunities for us to have jobs with our trades that build this amazing city, but do it in a way that would be sustainable, that would be a source of good urban planning, good buildings, and great jobs, particularly for newcomer communities, for Indigenous, for women in trades, and others. And when the recession was hitting in the early 90s, the real estate market collapsed. We had 30% of people unemployed. Almost all the women that come to trades have been starved out. There is no seniority in construction. You stay based on your productivity and the company you work for. And one day there was a conversation with a guy called Peter Tabuns about the opportunity to do energy retrofits and design green buildings. And Greg, the engineer, was talking about being able to design a building that would use 30% less electricity, 40% less gas than a standard building. And we were intrigued because there was one company going to building owners and saying, we can reduce those costs and we can make that happen. And we took that idea to City Council, and Rob Maxwell and Peter Tabuns worked it out, got another guy called Jack Layton to help design the process, and the Better Buildings Partnership. The first major building retrofit was First Canadian Place, opened by the Reichmans. And we literally put hundreds of people back to work, people who could actually pay their rent again, young apprentices who could finish their time, women in the trades could actually stay in those trades. And that success story I have taken all around the world. because I'd been involved at the national level in the Canadian Labour Congress Environment Committee, globally in the Just Transition Center. And that success story actually sparked a major initiative in the United States called the New York Jobs Initiative, and now the National Center for Jobs that is doing those kinds of programs all across the United States. I was fortunate to also be at the COP 21 in Paris in 2015, when the world leaders came together and said, we've actually got to look towards a low carbon economy where people can live their lives because we understand what climate crisis will actually mean, particularly for the global south. And we committed to a lot of stuff there. The most remarkable presentation wasn't from a politician or a national leader or corporate CEO. So a guy called Ken Smith. Ken was the president of the union local at the tar sands, 3,800 members working for Suncor. And he stood up in a room full of 800 trade unionists and said, people say, what are you doing? Like advocating for climate and all these measures. It's going to be a problem for us. And Ken said, well, I kind of put it like this, because Ken was from New Brunswick. He'd worked in a zinc mine that had run out. And like so many others from Atlantic Canada, went to the tar sands, as many of my friends went to the tar sands. He says, I put it like this. Imagine you've got a decent life. You got a nice home on the edge of town. You got looking over the beautiful forest. And then one day a fire breaks out. And the fire starts coming towards your house. And you and the wife and the two kids grab everything you can in your arms and you run away from that fire. But it continues to pursue you until you come to a river. And then you have choices. You can either stand there and perish. You can throw away everything you've got and try and swim across that river. Or if you'd started earlier, we could have built a bridge. And that wisdom was shared with 800 trade unionists in Paris 8 months before the Fort McMurray fire took the homes of half of his members and destroyed them. And that concept of building a bridge is what's allowed us to say we can have jobs and the environment. Yuko Powell, the first Jamaican Canadian head of any construction, first black leader of any construction union in this country, challenged me once, said, John, that's tree hugging stuff. I appreciate it, but I'm an immigrant and I need to know there's good jobs. And that from my community, instead of those kids joining gangs, there's a career. And he was a cynic until one day we got a call that there was a recycling plant being built for as part of the City of Toronto recycling efforts back in the day in the 90s. And one of our companies was doing the concrete, and Yukon and I went down, and there was 20 people that had a job because of a green measure that being put in place by the NDP government of Ontario and the City of Toronto. And Yuko stopped becoming a doubter and became a major advocate for green jobs. When we started looking at green buildings and green building standards, the city was a leader. But I went to a conference some years ago, and the head of the Green Building Council of the United States was speaking. And he said, the whole notion of LEEDs, of those standards for buildings, silver, gold, platinum LEEDs, was started by a bunch of hippie architects and some West Coast developers who used to have communes and blah, blah, and people looked at it as fun. Last year, he said in the United States, 1 billion square feet of buildings were built to LEED standards. 1 billion square feet, because the developers understood the capacity of having lower costs on utilities. The builders understood they could do this and make a bit more money. And the residents were very happy to see a building they were in with cleaner air and lower carbon footprint. And when we put those kinds of things together, we know that there is a different future. But it's not just for the construction trades. It's across the board. Teachers have a role. The City of Toronto started the Eco Schools program and looked at the role that schools have to not only teach kids to appreciate our climate and our Mother Earth, but also to look at how they do everything from recycling to growing vegetables in schools through hydroponics, which TDSB had done. In our conservation authorities, developed green building standards pilots so others could follow. And then more recently, I have good friends in New York City in the janitors for, people may have heard of Janitors for Justice, trying to raise up the standards of those people who are cleaners, who are usually immigrants, who are treated like crap. And in New York, they also have a lot of building superintendents part of their union. It's a unique part of a union. They trained up over 1,000 building superintendent, building operators, to call them, in every apartment building over 5 stories in New York. They're unionized, the building people. They trained them up on green building operators about what they could do. Because I could renovate, a construction crew can renovate a building perfectly, but if the person running it day to day doesn't know how to maintain that and take it, you quickly lose the efficiency. 2 years later, an independent study was done to show that those building operators by themselves had improved energy efficiency anywhere between 6 to 12%. And in New York, you're talking about millions of square feet of buildings. And our labor education center, under the leadership of Steve Schallhorn, who, by the way, used to work for Greenpeace, and by the way, actually hired Stephen Guilbeault years ago to climb down a rope off the CN Tower and get arrested. Steve Schallhorn put this program together, and we've now partnered with a number of agencies serving newcomer youth and diverse youth, and trained dozens and dozens and dozens of people to become green building operators and go and work on buildings. So it's not just a gender thing. It's across the board in healthcare, moving down the carbon footprint, in long-term care, making sure that those buildings are the best and places for people to live and work. In every sector of economy, there's a way we can build a green future. And instead of looking at the smoke coming out of the flames around Fort McMurray or the flooding that are happening in Western Road, we can say we can build a better future for all Canadians, no matter where we've come from, no matter who we worship or who we love or what we do, but we can make this a much better world. Thanks very much.
John, thank you very much. That was great. And you're getting a lot of response from the audience. Before we go to the next panelist, I'm just going to remind people, if you have a question, please use the Q&A. If you have a comment, please use the Q&A. When our panelists are finished, we're going to go through those questions and comments so that your voice is heard. I get to introduce Megan, and then Samantha goes after that. So Megan Gordon is the manager of Pembina Institute's Sustainable Workforce Program. Megan develops solutions to addressing the socioeconomic dimensions of a clean energy transition. Passionate about people-centered climate policy, Megan focuses on supporting workers and communities in adapting to a changing world. She collaborates closely with labor organizations and civil society groups and serves on the board of Blue Green Canada. Megan, take it away.
Thanks so much, Peter. I will try to follow John's very inspirational comments. I'm really pleased to be a part of this conversation today. So for folks who aren't familiar, Pembina is a national clean energy think tank. We're headquartered in Calgary, and we've spent the last 4 decades working to provide ideas about how to reduce the environmental impacts of energy production and to implement clean energy solutions. And of course, increasingly, we're understanding that a transition to a clean energy system is not only a technical transition, but a social and an economic one. And so that's where the work of my program comes in. We're really looking at, specifically how best to maximize the social and economic opportunities that will inevitably emerge for workers and have already proven to be massive job generators. So my remarks today will really focus on some of the job creation potential in clean electricity, with a focus on renewable power generation, which of course is an essential part of achieving a decarbonized grid and of course doubling our electricity generation capacity, which we've heard quite a lot about in terms of key federal priorities. So maybe just to take a step back first, looking at the global picture, as Peter already mentioned, the renewable energy build out is massively expanding. We're seeing about a surge of 150% in capacity over the last decades, over the course of the across the world. And jobs in clean power specifically are now outpacing the growth of fossil fuel jobs. So as an example, solar energy is occupying 40% of new job growth in the power industry. And then we're seeing similar trends here in Canada. So over the last 10-year period, we've seen jobs in renewable energy and storage increase by a factor of 5, and that's only set to increase. So on a path to net zero by 2050, we expect about 70% of new power generation to come from wind and solar energy, and that creates jobs in construction and operations and maintenance. And it's also really important to acknowledge the role of provinces. We've seen a lot of leadership and concrete initiatives that have been, put in place to accelerate this trend. So one of which was led by BC Hydro through a call for power that was a competitive process. It ended up identifying 14 renewable projects which were approved, all with nearly 50% First Nation ownership, and they're located all across the province of BC. And in total, it's expected to generate about 3,000 jobs through the construction lifespan of these projects. And just to add a comparison, that's very close to the number of workers that were employed during some of the peak construction days of the Site C hydroelectric dam, which is a major project up in northern BC. And then in Ontario, the Independent Electricity System Operator also launched several requests for proposals for new projects. And this was quite different from BC's in the sense that it was technology agnostic, but it was ultimately renewable energy projects that secured these contracts based on their performance and costs. And so we're seeing in Ontario potential 14 new projects with municipal support and strong First Nation partnerships as well. So to take us back to the more national level, we've seen some really promising projections from a friend of Pembina, economist Jim Stanford, who some of you may be familiar with his work. With solar and wind projects combined, we could see the creation of between 1.5 million and 2.2 million job years in construction. And in operations and maintenance, which are permanent ongoing jobs, we could see as many as 53,000 to 79,000 jobs over the next 25 years if we stay on a path to net zero. And today we're seeing labor shortages in the solar and wind industry. So it really underscores the need to align our workforce development systems to ensure that we can recruit, train, and retain the workers that we need, and ensuring that this isn't going to be exacerbated over time. And not only is it a job creating activity, we're seeing so many other economic benefits. And again, Peter alluded to the circumstances in Alberta. And despite some of the regression that we've seen in their policy positions regarding renewables, we've seen over in 2025 alone, $70 million dollars in municipal tax revenues contributing to local municipalities in Alberta, and just in this year alone, and that's only rising as new projects come along. So there's benefits in terms of jobs and general economic contributions for local communities as well. And then I really don't want to also focus just solely on the renewable energy industry, because there's so many other opportunities that are catalyzed through the introduction of this technology. We really need to look across the entire energy system and the value chain, which has a multiplier effect on the jobs that are created. So in order to, create solar panels and wind turbines, we need to source the materials, and that supports jobs in the mining industry. We need to make the technology and build it and assemble it, which creates jobs in manufacturing. Of course, there's the installation of that technology, which creates jobs in the construction trades and in engineering. And then in terms of advancements in the technology, particularly when it comes to storage, that creates jobs in research and development as we continue to innovate and ensure that the cost curves are continuing to decline. And then again, we need to make this power more abundant and available. And that means the build out of transmission and distribution lines, and that creates jobs in utilities and in construction. So this is really a massive catalyst. We need that source of renewable energy in order to sort of create this ripple effect across these industries. And of course, there are supply chains associated with other types of energy, of course. But we need to think really strategically regarding the direction that we're seeing the globe. Again, it is the cheapest and most readily available source of power in the world. It can be built quickly, and it can make the cost of power much more affordable. And that's a really attractive quality for industries that use a lot of power. And so really it can facilitate more investment in Canada, which boosts economic competitiveness and creates even more jobs. It can also support our ability to participate in global supply chains. We need to move fast so that our know-how can be sold elsewhere in the world and contribute to GDP. And that's what we're seeing across the globe. The direction we're seeing is that the world is moving to renewables, and that's what the world wants. And then finally, of course, given the circumstances that we're seeing geopolitically, it can't underscore the importance of energy security enough when it comes to renewable energies, because we really can't continue to rely on volatile states that are controlling the price and availability of fossil fuels. We can be much more independent by harnessing the power of the wind and the sun, which nobody owns. So really, again, in terms of the workforce implications, it's going to create more stability because we don't see the same kind of boom and bust cycles that we do in the fossil fuel sector. And we're really just trying to secure more stability across the board for workers and the economy. And I will end it there. Thank you so much.
Megan, thank you so much. That was great. Two excellent panelists down, two excellent panelists to go. Samantha, I turn
Yes,
it over to you.
I'm gonna jump in and introduce our next two panelists. I'll start with Trish. So Trish Long is the founder and owner of Switch Heat Pumps, a climate-focused heating and cooling company that got the ball rolling for heat pumps in Toronto. Small disclosure, Trish installed a heat pump in my home back in 2021. She has always been passionate about solutions that decarbonize our homes and our lives. She has also worked at the Evergreen Brickworks in Toronto and actually also at the Pembina Institute, which we know is an Alberta-based clean energy think tank. So I'm excited to listen to Trish and then our next panelist talk about what's happening on the ground.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Samantha. I understand about jobs. I have been between jobs, and there's nothing worse. It's soul destroying. And having worked multiple places, I saw this funny thing happen where a lot of people that hire want to hire somebody that already has a job instead of hiring somebody looking for a job. And having a nonprofit background and limited budgets, hiring away wasn't really something we could afford to do. And I've never found better people than when I found people looking. But yeah, when you don't have a job and you can't pay the bills and you're worried about the rent, you're worried about food, kids, futures, you can't think about anything but today and tomorrow. So yes, there's nothing more important, and to think that's not front and center of everything I do would be incorrect, because we all need to earn a living. I've had three major areas I worked in. My very first career was as a financial advisor. And then, as Samantha said, I worked at Evergreen Brickworks and then the Clean Energy Think Tank in Alberta. And it was a wonderful time to be working at the Pembina Institute. It was when Obama was still in power. We had just gotten Trudeau in. We had Fox in Mexico, and there was going to be a North American agreement on capturing fugitive methane emissions. Everybody was in alignment. It was beautiful. And then Rachel Notley was elected in Alberta, and Alberta jumped in, phased out coal, put together a great program for renewables, better than Ontario's by far. They really nailed it in Alberta. But then tables turned, and we got Trump, and we got Jason Kenney, and things happened in Ontario that I won't speak of. But it all of that translates to a lot of boom bust for green initiatives. And while oil prices go up and down, they always survive. Whereas that's not the case with renewable energy. we're starting things up, we're getting things going. When we take 2 steps forward, we can't have the rug pulled out from underneath us. And that's what I'm loving seeing, is that I think we're finally at this point where we can survive no matter what, because it makes so much financial sense. So to speak to what I'm doing now, I'm installing residential heat pumps. And basically, if you have an air conditioner, that's a type of heat pump. It moves heat from inside your house to outside your house. What we call a heat pump does the opposite in winter. It takes heat from outside and puts it in your house. And the refrigerant, there's a refrigerant loop, and it's so cold, it's -45, -50 Celsius, so that even if it's -25 outside, it can still absorb heat and bring that back into your house. When we started this in 2020, actually, because I lost my job because of COVID, I certainly wasn't going to get a job at that time because nobody was hiring. But a lot of people felt uncertain, and I did the thing that scared me the most. I started a business. My father had always said, small businesses are risky, small businesses are risky. But a wise mentor of mine said, you know, big businesses used to look after people with indexed pensions and you work till retirement, but they don't do that anymore. Times have changed. And that gave me the confidence to jump in and advise people on heat pumps. So I had the pleasure of meeting Samantha, who had the great idea. She said, Trish, I need to know where we're going. What's the whole thing? Can you make something that's the whole thing? And that invented my first product, which was a clean tech roadmap that I would do for people. And it had pictures to show you what you would do, and prices, and an order of operations. I did energy audits as well, but they were all in gigajoules, and had charts and graphs, but didn't really tell you how to get it done. So after a year or two of advising, so many people had asked for help finding installers, and it can be a bit of the Wild West out there with what you get. And so I partnered up with a mentor of mine, and we started Switch Heat Pumps. And it was the first that I know of carbon-free HVAC company that would install your heating and cooling and your hot water. We now have 5 crews and a full-time maintenance service technician. And of our 6 vehicles, 3 of them are electric, which amazingly, I mean, more people we should have affordable vehicles, because we should have affordable electric cars for everyone. We save $15,000 a year in fuel with one electric service van. It's incredible. It pays for itself in 2 years. At first, heat pumps were expensive when they went in. Thank you, Samantha, for contributing early on, but she did get a rebate, and the rebate helped offset that. These days, because we're faster, we do them much faster. There's more supply, we have more brand choice. The rebates did their job. It is now the exact same cost to buy a furnace and a high efficiency air conditioner as it is to buy a heat pump that does heating and air conditioning. So it's on par. So people have good choices. It's also a really comfortable kind of heat. It can keep the temperature very steady in your home. And I believe if you want people to adopt a technology, it really has to be better than the technology you're changing from. And we now have that. But I see a side of the industry where there were no rebates, air to water heat pumps. Lots of people in Toronto have boilers and radiator systems, but without a rebate, we didn't get more product. The only product's really expensive because there's so few of them, and the technicians aren't getting practice installing them. So we've got to support renewable technologies when they come up. And we want to do what the rest of the world is doing. What smart countries are doing is they're doing both. They're doing responsible fossil fuels and they're adding beneficial renewables. We talk about a fast transition out of oil and gas, but it can't be fast. Few people know Canada is the fourth largest oil and gas producer in the world. Some people in the country would have you believe we can hardly get any oil out, but that's not true. We're big and there are jobs and those jobs are going to stay. But do we want children and grandchildren doing those same things and missing out on the way the rest of the world is going? So, Norway used their sovereign wealth fund to invest in renewable energy, and the Saudis are invested in solar and electric cars, and our bailout package with COVID, a lot of it went to fossil fuels, whereas China's went almost entirely to clean energy. And I've been out of jobs. I don't want anybody to be out of a job. I want jobs to be plentiful. And to do that, you can't have a dinosaur economy. You've got to have a modern economy. You've got to have the things other countries want. You've got to have innovation and good tradespeople. So anyway, to wrap up, I was sure I would be not talk this long, but I guess I am passionate about heat pumps and the energy transition. To wrap up, we're now 15 people at Switch Heat Pumps. We're an amazing team. Nobody has ever chosen to leave Switch Heat Pumps. In fact, people have brought their friends and family. We have two family teams at Switch, and we're growing, and our sector's growing, and it's exciting. So I look forward to employing more people in the space. And a quick thank you to everyone that put this on and to everybody that's attending. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trish. All right, our final panelist, Serena Mendizabal. I didn't do as good a job as Peter, is a community-based researcher, grassroots organizer, and environmental advocate. And she's also the managing director at Sacred Earth Solar. She's worked in climate, environment, and clean energy for almost a decade. Sacred Earth Solar is one of the only Indigenous nonprofits implementing renewable energy and sustainable infrastructure through a climate justice approach. Through Sacred Earth Solar, Serena has implemented renewable energy and sustainable infrastructure projects alongside communities across Turtle Island. So thank you, Serena.
Thank you. Niao goa scano sunigao so gai kononi kwenzo de ochinge shoutan oswaigo antoquatigo. Hi everyone. It is so lovely to be here tonight, especially on Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe homelands. I'm not too far from all of you in Toronto. I'm a Cayuga Wolf Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River, so we are actually the closest res to Toronto, and I'm about an hour away. So it's nice to be with community tonight. As mentioned, I'm the managing director at Sacred Earth. We are an Indigenous women-led nonprofit. We've actually made the shift from solar to just Sacred Earth in the last little bit, really understanding our expansive understanding of what a just transition can really look like, even beyond renewable energy. And you've heard it here from all the panelists tonight, but really thinking about energy conservation, efficiency, transportation, transmission, distribution, food, water, all of these different areas that really create this comprehensive vision for the world that we're trying to create. So when I think about this shift for us, it's really been an exciting pathway we're going down of really coming to our vision and coming clear to what we're really believed to be a just transition, and what that can look like in our communities when we actually localize solutions. My background really coming into this work has been around for 10 years. I'm 27 years old. I always try to age myself because I'm turning 28 this year. So, Peter, when you first got elected, I was 8 years old. And it was also in the time that we had major conflict going on in Six Nations around our land rights. And so for myself as that young person, I've always been really informed by what's been going on in our community, and really like growing up in the backdrop of not only conflict, but also protection and what that means for our people. And so it really informed me to come back then so many years after, about a decade ago, and think, oh, what do I want to do to continue to making our communities healthy, to continue working to advance our sovereignty, to support our healing and the justice that is needed to come to mends and to build the kind of future we want in the present. And so I ended up working coming back from university. I went to Western, was doing my master's around industrial health impacts and impact assessment when it came to large industrial projects that were impacting our health and well-being, working with East Coast communities. And I came back home. I needed a summer job, so I started working in community. And it was in the midst, a few years after the coal phase out from Kathleen Wynne, and really thinking about this opportunity in Six Nations from our community. There was actually in 2011 a major report that went out that had a lot of engagement around what were the specific needs of the community at that point, especially when it pertained to different priorities in the community, one being economic development. And really, it showed that economic development and politics had to be separate. We need to separate business from decision making and leadership and try and find a new avenue to do these kinds of projects. So it only felt right when this coal phase out was happening, and we actually are one of the closest communities to the Nanticoke coal power plant that was around on Lake Erie. It's only half an hour from our community. And has had adverse, I think everyone here in Ontario can know the adverse health impacts that it's not only done to the province, but to the rest of the country, especially as being one of the top 10 emitting projects at the point where it was when it was commissioned. So the decommissioning came, and what did that mean for our community? It meant, okay, we're not going to get left behind again. We are going to have a role within the energy mix of this province, and we're going to put forth our leadership. So they did this through the means of a development corporation, ended up working on solar and wind assets, and have now since grown since 2015 the largest First Nation clean energy portfolio of any First Nation in the country, with around 1,800 megawatts and around, as of right now, 18 solar and wind assets. But we also have just now increased with two major energy storage projects, the Hagersville Battery Storage and the Oneida Energy Storage, one being 300 megawatts and the other being 250 megawatts. And this is just Six Nations, because right now, Indigenous peoples across the country are lead partners or have equity within 20% of clean electricity infrastructure in the country. This being 200 to 300 medium to large scale projects and all like over 3,000 small scale projects. So we quite literally are leading the transition across this country. And while we're doing so, we are also prioritizing a community-led approach. And I like to think of this difference between First Nations owned and community led. A lot of the time we've seen in the past with impact benefit agreements, proponents coming to our community and saying, this is what we're going to do, and you're just going to follow it, and really trying to get us on the same page. But what First Nations have now done is create community-led agendas where we set our own agenda and determine through community energy plans, through community engagement, the kinds of projects we want. And even outside of the projects, the priorities. And with that has come so many opportunities for workforce development within our communities that really focus on building the capacity and technical skills of people, build up education and knowledge of energy systems, energy policy, and also build up the opportunity for community engagement and to be actively informed on the projects that are actually happening in our communities. And I think when we're talking about workforce development, there is many opportunities. We've even seen in Six Nations that ACON and Six Nations of the Grand River have created a joint venture that has now been called A6N. It is the main construction company that we use. We also see that with projects being brought into our community, we're seeing vertical growth around business leadership and being able to manage these projects. But the one thing is, when I think about the workforce and I think about, okay, yes, there's so many opportunities, is do we actually have the knowledge and the understanding to do the projects and the skills that are needed? Our communities have become economic hostages to the remaining industrial impacts around us and projects around us. And we also just haven't had the same access to mainstream education, which I don't even know if mainstream education has the knowledge and the skills to be given to actually push forward a transition. And so when I think about what we've been seeing is this major gap. So we were doing infrastructure projects, we had this major gap, and what that was education, training, capacity building, community engagement. We've now been approached by communities that are like, this is a niche that we believe could be filled through the work of Sacred Earth and through the prioritization of making sure communities are informed. Um, and while I say that we are lacking capacity and we are lacking knowledge, the skills and there is certain skills that we don't have. We also need to find the means of how we can transition or transfer soft skills that are already been gained in our communities. I'm thinking about how you guys were mentioning energy efficiency, and we're doing a low carbon build right now on a new building. And a lot of that has to do with construction, and a lot of those skills are there when it comes to labor and trades, as well as other jobs in policy, as well as other jobs in business. But everyone knew when it came to an energy efficiency build, the contractor that we ended up going with, they already knew what they were doing. It wasn't necessarily being labeled as energy efficient, but it was. And that actually is translated as an intergenerational component too that I picked up on is some of our elders while we were doing the building, they were thinking they were doing a tour of the building and the design and in we're going to be storing heritage seeds, and they went into the one room and they put the attic door, the contractor put the attic door in the room where it would be storage and have the climate control, and right away the elder said, you're going to lose all moisture rises. It'll be all lost and the heat will go up, and you're going to create more moisture in a room that where you're trying to provide climate control to the seeds. And so just hearing like when you actually engage with community, the knowledge that we do hold. And so I think it's this gap that I'm seeing on the ground of being able to, one, bring the knowledge communities also hold, bringing technical knowledge, kind of finding the intersections between that, and then using that as a promotion to find opportunities for our communities to actually be involved with green jobs. Because a lot of the time, I think we're actually already doing the work, we just don't have the language to it. So, with that all said, it's been quite a journey for Indigenous peoples. And all the projects we work on, we actively see in community-led RFPs, procurement mandates, local community participation mandates that if you're doing a solar farm, you need to have X, Y, Z, many people in the project who will be gaining employment. So this is stuff we're already like mandating within the contracts that move forward on a lot of these larger projects. Um, and over the past 20 years, Indigenous Clean Energy just launched their national survey. And over the last 20 years, they found that these projects that Indigenous communities have been a part of have actually created 51,756 jobs in our communities. So not only are we leading the transition and reducing our GHG emissions and bringing into our communities, we are building jobs and building careers for our people that can have dignity and agency and hope. And I loved what you were saying, Trish. I loved all what the panelists were saying. But I'm really grateful that I have such an amazing job and I can do this work in community, for community, by community. It's really special when you can find something that you connect and feels like heart work. And I hope when we're able to do this, we to promote affordability and to promote more jobs and increase this, I really hope that we can also promote that interconnection that we have with working a green job is also caretaking for the land and is also reestablishing that relationship we have with Mother Earth. So, Nyawagoa, and thank you so much.
Okay. Samantha, if you don't mind my jumping in, Serena, thank you very much for that. That was a great presentation. Panelists, we have quite a few questions. I'm going to go to the first one, and Samantha, you'll be taking the next. Question here is, we import a lot of fossil fuel from the US. However, we send fossil fuel down to them, they refine it, and we buy it back. And reality is, fossil fuel is a critical ingredient to much of what we need and purchase in this society. How do you reconcile that anti-fossil fuel attitude with the need for fossil fuels? And Megan, you may want to speak to this as well, but I will say simply, um, right now, fossil fuels are pretty critical. If you cut off the supply of gas to Toronto in the winter, people would go cold. What we're talking about is making the transition from using imported fossil fuels to heat pump heated homes using electricity that's generated in Ontario using wind or solar power. So it's a question of making a transition from one to the other and the benefits that we get from it. Uh, this isn't some flaky stuff saying fossil fuels are bad, let's shut it all down today. That's not practical, but making the transition is very practical. Megan, you may want to enlarge on this because Pembina has been dealing with the fossil fuel industry in Alberta for a long time. You guys have a big picture.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think it just really underscores the importance of the need to electrify our end uses. And so that's electric vehicles, it's heat pumps, and it's also industrial applications. And then it's finding means of achieving energy efficiency. And those are things we really want to see as being central to Canada's electricity strategy. It's equally important to increasing the supply of electricity as well. And so I think, we really also want to see more policy stability around these topics so that industry and customers and workers who are looking for opportunities in those sectors have the confidence to make the choices that they want to make. And they have the ability to understand where Canada's vision is headed, and that should be towards a more electrified system. I think the question also touches a little bit on the lack of sort of value-added manufacturing that we see, and the sort of resource extraction and shipping overseas that we see in many of our different industries. And so really finding opportunities in other natural resources like critical minerals to really add value, which creates, again, that job multiplier effect and keeps more jobs in Canada is also something we need to be thinking about.
Thank you. Samantha.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I will move on to the next question that we have. So geothermal technology and oil drilling use similar machines, techniques, and skill sets. What is the possibility of expediting geothermal energy? Ground source heat pumps for area power, superheated geothermal at scale in Canada. So I wonder, John, is this something that you think you could answer? Yep.
Sure, and thanks for that question. Geothermal is an amazing potential, and it's not being tapped yet for a number of reasons. Actually, in Manitoba, there's a native-led group called ASCII Energy that's doing geothermal in a number of hard-to-get-to reserves to replace all the diesel stuff. In Toronto, the elementary teachers of Toronto, when they built their headquarters on Isabella, was a geothermal heating there. And part of the Green Building Council, strategy is to say, how do we expand that? There's been some technology issues. There's been some shortage of drillers, oddly enough, to do some of that. But there are training centers that are doing that. 20 years ago, the Plumbers and Pipefitters Training Center in Toronto on 936 Warden was training people on geothermal. 30 years ago, they were training people on heat pumps, and they continue to train people on heat pumps. So we have examples of those things that can be put together. The Electricians Union in Toronto have been training on solar for decades, and when the TDSB, negotiated to have solar on the roofs of many of those schools, it was the union trades that put those up so that they're standing. I want to touch on another element of this, and somebody, Elena, asked about on carpenters. 10 years ago, there was 1,000 members of my and her union, the Carpenters Union, putting up solar in all across Ontario, in solar panels on roofs, on fields, and so on. And then, of course, Doug Ford killed all of that stuff. There was a lot more electricians, but there was that many carpenters doing it. And we know that those are opportunities. I don't know that it's being offered in the training center now because of the setback with that. But the union training centers are crucial places for doing these things. The operating engineers, for instance, are also training people on using that material. And when they did some of the hydro work in the north, they sat down with the First Nations in the north and actually negotiated proper nation to union agreements around explicitly hiring Indigenous youth, bringing them to the training, for cranes, for heavy machinery and others, and actually going through that process you would expect about, really respectful and honorable relationship building. We have the highest level of construction unionization in North America here because our unions have combined welcoming immigrants from every part of the world with a deep commitment to training. My union partner is 27. A member who started 10 years ago will be contributing $50,000 of their own income to the training curriculum for the next generation. $50,000. Every person, every member will contribute. And there's thousands and thousands of apprenticeships in all the construction trades, apprentices in all the construction in Greater Toronto. And technology, we have those partnerships with contractors, with builders to make sure we can do green buildings when people are asking them. And we got some partnerships with the Green Building Council to advocate that that's what developers should choose to build.
John, thank you very much. I've got the next question. And Megan, I'm going to be asking you because I think this is an area where you would have more knowledge than most. How much activity is there in Canada in research, development, and innovation in clean energy technologies? And how much support is there from government sources for that work? And I realize, Trish, you may also be a person who can speak to this.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think that is one thing that we hear quite consistently from entrepreneurs and folks in the innovation space is that we need to put more resources towards some of these R&D activities. Again, we're looking at being competitive on a global scale. And Canada is also one of the countries, I think, with the highest educated population in terms of advanced degrees, with PhDs and master's degrees. And so, really finding public dollars that prioritize some of that research is critical and is going to have, again, this really long-term benefit if we are to be successful in exporting some of our technology and know-how. I can't speak to the exact number of dollars, but it is something we're hearing quite a lot from the community that's insufficient.
Trish, did you want to comment on this as well?
Peter, would you just repeat the crux of the question?
Really, how much government support is there for the development of green energy and green energy innovation?
It tends to come and go depending on who we have in power. Yes, so right now things are dry.
Okay.
And a change would be most helpful, please and thank you.
Message received and understood. Serena, you have your hand up. Did you want to address this as well?
Yeah, I would love to. Just from an Indigenous standpoint, we have seen, I think, the prioritization within the Trudeau government around the funding support towards Indigenous-led clean energy solutions. We've seen this under the Smart Renewable Electrification Program. We saw in the CERC, the clean energy for rural and remote communities. We can see it in Northern Reach, really focusing on our the Northern Territories, as well as the IODI, Indigenous Off-Diesel Initiative. So we have seen like this boom, in funding from the federal government to support the implementation of green energy as well as workforce development, which we can see actually with the STIP program, the Science and Technology Internship Program, that a lot of now nonprofits such as Indigenous Clean Energy or Student Energy, which is I'm on the board of, it's a leading organization, charity focusing on getting young people into the clean energy sector. We can see that they've used this funding from STIP and have invested as a means of wage subsidies. So actively being able to work with organizations and companies now all across the country to provide wage subsidies so that they are able to bring more young people 35 and under onto their staff to gain skills and then to find meaningful employment. So we have seen the benefits of what federal funding can look like. Now we're in, as Trish said, it depends on the day, it depends on the politician and who's in office. We can see under the Carney administration that things might look a little bit different, and we aren't quite sure what that's going to look like, especially with the release of the national electricity strategy, obviously with focuses that we will be seeing an east to west grid built out, and we do want to prioritize jobs, but from an Indigenous standpoint, we are seeing the sunset of major federal programs in place. The only one that I saw actually mentioned throughout the National Electricity Strategy was the Smart and Renewable Electrification Program with 4.5 billion, which has different streams from capacity building to project implementation. But some of those other programs I mentioned, we don't know the status of what that looks like, and they're set to be sunsetting in 2027, so at the end of this fiscal year. And this would be extremely detrimental to all of the work being done in communities and all the work that is in the pipeline to be done. We saw with the last SREP call out that it was oversubscribed by tenfold, and there was only so many, there was 92 projects that applied. So 92 projects with Indigenous ownership, leadership, partnership within them, and the government just didn't have the capacity to fund them all. So we see that there's a need, and we see that there's possibly a deadline to when we'll have status of renewal, but really this not having these funding programs in place would change the landscape that we're seeing and so much growth that we've been seeing in our communities.
Thank you, panelists. I'm going to turn it over to Samantha, but I just want to note we're coming close to the end of our time. If you panelists are agreeable, we'll do about an extra 15 minutes, and that means we'll get 2 questions in, and then you panelists will get closing remarks, and Samantha and I will get closing remarks. If everyone's okay with that, Samantha, I'll turn it over to you for the next 2 questions.
Sure, yes. I'm going to switch us around here to a couple of technical questions that came up in the chat, maybe directed at you, Trish. There was a question, is it possible to switch from a gas boiler? I know you can answer that. And can you speak as well to residential towers? Is it possible to switch them to electric heat pumps or away from gas?
Mhm. Um, the first question, boilers to heat pumps, yes, it exists. We're doing one now. It's not inexpensive is the problem. It's more than buying a new gas boiler, to the tune of maybe double. So that's not a scalable solution. We just have early adopters, bless them, that will do it just to get things going. And nothing starts without the first few people to go. Will there be more in the future? Yes. I happen to know Mitsubishi is coming out with the first heat pump I know of in Canada that is split type and makes the water hot enough for cast iron radiators. So that'll be good news for Toronto, but again, price tag. Other options, sometimes when I have a young family moving into a house, they end up putting up, because they don't have air conditioning with radiators, they end up putting up ductless heat pumps, and they'll put 5 or 6 of them in a home, and they end up using that instead of the boiler. And I actually had a client last week that was so excited with the air conditioning. He put them in mostly for air conditioning, but he's so excited by them. I bet he doesn't turn his boiler on next winter. There's some neat innovations out there. And for towers, towers have so many different structures and types of heating. If there's room for a geothermal conversion, older towers had lots of green space. That's where geothermal and if Enbridge had started putting in geothermal for new subdivisions 30 years ago, we'd be in a very different place today. And the next time Enbridge should start doing this is tomorrow. If Enbridge would invest, we drill really well in Canada. If they would start drilling and converting towers, it would be a wonderful thing.
Thank you. Peter, did you want to go to the next question?
Oh, Sorry.
Or I can jump in.
Yes, go
I
ahead,
have
because I
there's
thought you were
another
going to be
question
the
I've got here. Affordability is a topic that people are concerned about. This person says a friend put in 2 years of adding insulation, sealing their home, ripping out all the gas, installing hot water and HVAC heat pumps. The yearly savings and energy cost was $4,000 a year. Are there studies that quantify energy savings? Maybe Megan, I don't know if you wanted to jump in here.
Yes, there are, is my answer. I'd be happy to follow up with the individual who posed the question to support them with some resources. I don't have them at my fingertips.
Okay. Well, then, what I'd like to do then, given our remaining time, and we're definitely over, is have some closing comments. If we could have a minute or so from each of our panelists. Serena, if we could start with you, and then we'll just go in reverse order to the panelists speaking from the beginning.
Yeah, I will start by saying thank you to all my fellow panelists. It's so lovely to be in a with so many amazingly like knowledgeable and incredible speakers. You don't always have that all the time, so it's such a privilege. I just want to touch on the sentiment around affordability and really, I think when we think about affordability, when it comes to a lot of the projects we're doing, I think having that core focus going back into community energy planning and really looking at what the needs are. And with community energy planning, and when we are putting up big projects, we actually have like a core lesson that no project should be going forth before doing work towards energy efficiency and energy conservation. And I think there's such an opportunity within the workforce to reduce the amount of emissions that we have in by means of implementing energy efficiency and energy conservation. But I also think within that intersection of affordability, we also are having benefits towards sovereignty, community building, and specifically healthy homes and healthy spaces. And I think that's what's so powerful. Around these kinds of projects is they're not necessarily always for the means of building as much revenue as possible. And in Six Nations, working in community engagement consultation, I've seen what happens when we're putting up these like mega projects going forth, even if they're renewables, and with the means of we're going to generate as much revenue as possible. And so when I look at energy efficiency and energy conservation, I really see, I don't see it's as focused on revenue as some of the other projects, and I see it's actually focused on people, and it's focused on community, and it's focused on affordability. A lot of the time, we're seeing people deal with. I got this from Jessica Najwan she's the founder of Ishkode, and she was really talking about the heat or eat. And this is the dilemma that a lot of us are coming to at this point of I can't afford my utility bills, my water, my gas, my AC. It's all becoming too much to even afford groceries at the end of the day. And I feel like it's so simple, but it's really meaningful to see what are we doing this work for and what are the core benefits that we're really looking for within a transition. And that is to be able to afford our lives, to be able to live dignified livelihoods, and to be able to find careers and just passions all together. And I think that's where really bringing us back into how can we use less but do more for our people and for our health and well-being. So yeah, I just really appreciate some of these other panelists and their sentiments. But I really think bringing it back to people, bringing it back to community, and what are the core benefits that we're looking for in this transition. And obviously, one is affordability, and it's for having good jobs, and it's being able to take care of our own. And so that's what I think we really need to put our people power into. But yeah, now go and thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you so much. Trish.
Yes, Serena, good points there on affordability. And I didn't include when talking about heat pumps that it's much cheaper to cool your home with a heat pump than it is with an air conditioner. They're just more efficient. Same technology, but it's way more efficient. And And just a final comment. I really appreciate all the comments in the chat. Thanks to everybody who put questions there. I tried to answer a couple, and I apologize if I didn't answer yours specifically. But one theme I see there is there isn't a right and a wrong. Energy and jobs, it's about a mix. We need a mix. And we burn a lot of gas in Canada. We have the second highest per capita in the world. We're burning lots. We don't need to burn more gas, but we need to add things to that mix. And that's okay. If somebody wants their V8 engine pickup, I have to respect that. But if we can have electric school buses, I would hope that they could respect that too. And collectively, instead of fighting, collectively we can move towards solutions that improve things overall.
Trish, thank you very much. Megan.
Yeah, thanks again to all for the really interesting questions and contributions here. Just to maybe come back and reiterate a few of the points I wanted to make in my opening remarks. Again, we're looking at wind and solar energy potential as being incredibly strong. They're growing globally at a rapid pace and scale. It's cheap, it's abundant, it's secure. They create contributions to municipal revenues. They create opportunities for small businesses, particularly in rooftop installation. And then again, they create opportunities to participate in the global supply chains and attract investment. So again, we're seeing this huge opportunities across so many different occupations and disciplines in the value chain. And as we're seeing this growth, we also need to really reconcile that with the current trends that we're seeing in the oil and gas industry. So again, many of us have spoken to, I think, some of the volatility that we've seen in prices. And of course, that has implications for the workforce. At the same time, we're seeing, since peak oil production days in around 2012, we're seeing a decline and a decoupling of the jobs that are associated with production increases. So over about a 10-year period, we've seen a 43% decrease in the size of the oil and gas workforce, despite the fact that oil and gas production has been growing during that same period. And so in terms of the impacts of automation and in terms of, the profit-seeking behaviors of some of these companies, I think, we really need to right-size the conversation around how the oil and gas industry is actually contributing in terms of, how many people actually work in the workforce. It's really inflated in terms of the conversations that we're having as a nation. The other point I really want to make here is we want to not just look at quantity of jobs, but quality. And so one of the things my team is looking at are the policy mechanisms that we can use to make sure that jobs in the energy transition are good jobs that support families and communities and that provide the wages to support us through the affordability crisis that we're seeing. We've seen some really great examples of initiatives in the United States who have negotiated project labor agreements on some of their projects in the offshore wind space. Labor conditions can be attached to tax incentives and other mechanisms that create priority hiring for locals, for equity deserving groups, that establish prevailing wage standards, and that actually create spaces for apprenticeships and provide other kinds of labor protections. And we really want to engage the labor movement in this conversation and really show that renewable energy and the electrification isn't a threat, and it's really an opportunity to widen the tent of folks that are supportive in the hopes that they also see the opportunities that are available. Thanks so much.
Megan, thank you so much. John, if we could have your last words on this.
Yeah, what a fabulous panel. What an honor to be. I mean, at my age, I'm still learning every day, and this has been such an amazing set of skills and perspectives that you've assembled. I just want to thank you. I want to say, I talked about Ken Smith getting up in Paris in 2015, talking about green jobs and transition. In 2021, I was in Glasgow as a delegate from Canada to the UN on Climate Change. And we were very excited about some stuff. Stephen Guilbeault was our Minister of Environment, and he was driving a solid agenda, working very closely with a whole bunch of people. And A guy called Mark Carney showed up and said, "We've brought together all the major finance houses and we're moving trillions of dollars from dirty economy to clean economy." I am so heartbroken 5 years later that Mark Carney has literally ripped up everything that Stephen Guilbeault and others had put together, and that the cabinet that lives in the GTA, frankly, they have a responsibility for what that does to our country. And voters need to, keep them to account. But I want to go into a good place. We talked about energy and construction. Let me mention the film industry, one of the largest employers of people in Toronto-Danforth. There's a program called Green Screen. And the unions in the film sector and the more progressive film companies take it was of course it was developed in California. They've taken it, they've implemented that to dramatically lower the carbon footprint of film, not just in the studios, but out there doing the shootings, right? Moving away from generators and so on. In one of our largest employers is the South Central Postal Plant. 15 years ago, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers launched something called Delivering Community Power. They were the best just transition document of any union I've seen, and I've seen every union's just transition document, imagining a solar on every single postal office station in Canada, the 30,000 vehicles, the largest single vehicle owner in the public sector, transitioned to electric vehicles, using local post offices as community banks, because in so many smaller places, the banks have shut down and all there's left is money lenders. I was at the doors open at that bank up at Danforth and Monarch Park that shut down as a bank and became a friggin' moneylender, ripping off poor people, and also looking at farm to table delivering food in certain communities and saying, this is what Canada Post could be if we dreamed. And now instead, under this government, they're shutting every door-to-door delivery. They're shutting down post offices all over the place. They said no to postal banking. Um, and I'm going to end by actually thanking Serena for mentioning the impact benefit agreements from Indigenous peoples, because we stole some good ideas from the experience, the good and the bad of that experience, right? The bad, where they just, oh yeah, we'll hire two token kids and they can sit in a bench while we actually build the baggage handling, in the little airport in your local town. And I've known that from people telling me that for real, employers tell me that for real, to saying, let's build a community benefits framework that is actually holds them to account. So when we negotiated with the Toronto Community Benefits Network, with that Steve Schallhorn again was the founding director, and Rosemary Powell now is doing an amazing job leading, we demanded that 10% of all work, trade by trade, not just the people with the flags doing nothing, electricians, pipe fitters, steam fitters, everybody, millwrights, 10% of all work done by kids from newcomer communities, Indigenous communities, and women in the trades. And then when we were challenged, it's mostly a male thing, that's a gendered thing, we negotiated that there's something called professional admin and technical jobs. For every two people on a job site, there's somebody in office designing it, overseeing it, doing the contract compliance, doing the finance. We negotiated that they would create career pipelines, and we put hundreds of young people into professional admin and technical work. None of those are union jobs. No unions of ours got a single penny. We said that's for the community. And that's to make sure we're talking about equity in this work we do. And part of that was by really looking at those impact agreements that were there. And so, as we say, if we want to figure out, somebody said this before, really hard problems today, we want to know how to tackle them, we ask our ancestors, because they figured it out a long time ago, and we've just got to pull up their knowledge and their wisdom and apply it to today's problems. And what we say in the labor movement is solidarity is actually about generosity and giving of ourselves, of our time, our energy, and knowledge, and sharing that with others so we can build a better future together. Thanks.
John, thank you very much. And now, as your co-host, Samantha and I get to make some closing remarks. Samantha, do you want to lead off?
Sure, yes. This has been really great. I've learned a lot from each of our panelists. And I think what's been exciting about this panel is that we've heard that the energy transition is happening right now. Despite and in spite of difficult political circumstances, hostile political environments, both in Ontario and now federally. And I think the example that Megan brought up of the IESO in Ontario, request for proposals, was a really great one. It's clear that solar and wind are cheaper, better products now. And so even in this hostile environment, those are the projects that will be built out, and those are the jobs that will be created. And, I spoke in my opening comments about the triple benefits of green jobs with, safer jobs, reduced climate impacts, and then also just like more work opportunities. And I also found it really inspiring to hear all of the work that Serena, you're doing at Sacred Earth, and the way that the projects you're leading are also contributing to Indigenous sovereignty. So it's like a quadruple benefit that you have there. And I also, my final comment is just that it really sounds like these jobs that are being created are just as long lasting and robust as the jobs that we see in the fossil fuel sector. And it's not something that we talked about in great detail, but I know that a concern of some fossil fuel workers is like they have careers and they're worried that these jobs are not career jobs. These are just short-term jobs. But I think what we heard is that actually, like the work that Trish is doing, this is a career that you're engaged in. And so I think that's very hopeful for the green energy transition.
Well, Samantha, thank you for that. And I just wanted to say as well, you're a very impressive panel. It's been a pleasure to have you here this evening. And as John said, I learned a lot. And I thought I knew a lot, but I learned a lot more this evening. Uh, it's been great to work with you. We have a very big struggle ahead of us. The fossil fuel industry is fighting very hard to make sure that renewable power, energy conservation, the whole thrust to moving away from their product is something that doesn't succeed. And they'll continue to be putting out very strange stories about renewable power and the alternatives to fossil. Tonight, I think we made a good step forward in buttressing the idea that there's a lot of work in the energy transition, and we need to take advantage of that and bring those jobs back to people here in Ontario. I want to thank all of you participants who joined us tonight. Those of you who provided questions, we're sorry we didn't get to all of them. You're not a quiet or shy bunch. But it would take a 3-hour session to get through them all. And to my staff, Elaine and Rob, for all the work that you did to make this possible. Samantha, it's always a pleasure to work with you. And to everyone, have a great evening and thank you for joining us. We'll be sending this video out to everyone who registered, and we'll be posting it so that people who are interested in this question will get a chance to be informed. Good night, everyone.